This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Another Disney live-action remake is just around the corner. No, not Atlantis, not Treasure Planet, and don't even get us started on the Moana remake. I mean...
Drum roll, please. Moana!
No, we're talking about the remake for the animation classic, The Little Mermaid, a production that garnered much criticism from its announcement onward. Some critics being, well, politically biased to the point of idiocy. Halle Bailey actually seems like a great fit in this role, especially with the musical side of it, and from the reports, her great audition to play this part and her personal history with it. And that's what we should all be critiquing, the acting and the factors that really matter in this film, and nothing else. Unfortunately for her, it really feels like Disney is going to let her down in this movie. And again, it's in their ever-increasing issues with visual effects. They have been pumping out remakes so quickly that it really feels like anything they are making nowadays is starting to feel the effects of lack of quality control. But why do we think the visual effects in this movie will be an issue? How did Avatar: The Way of Water really hurt this movie? And I'm sorry, what is Disney's issue with doing water effects in movies lately? I hope you brought your swimsuit and snorkel, as it's time to jump right into the watery depths of the ocean and examine the problematic underwater life and panoramas of The Little Mermaid. The life of anyone in the creative field is a hard one, and this video is really not meant to trash any of those working on The Little Mermaid. Many are stuck in a box that Disney executives have put them in, and that can be annoying as a creative, getting stuck in a complicated situation like that. And that's why today's sponsor, Squarespace, takes that all out of the question and creates a super easy way to build a website without all of the complicated stuff.
Oh, nice segue. Smooth, good blend.
Well, not as nice or smooth as all the time you'd save building a website if you use Squarespace with their easy to design, customizable templates, scheduling, and more.
Dude, that was painful.
But still not as painful as trying to painstakingly code your own website when you don't have the time to learn another skill and just want to be out there filming something and getting better at your lighting technique. Squarespace has given us the opportunity to invite you to try it out for yourself right now. You can head over to squarespace.com/framevoyager below in the description to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code FrameVoyager. Searching up any of the trailers made for the Little Mermaid remake, one can quickly spot that Disney chose to put a dark spin on the underwater world Ariel lives in. I'm sorry, I don't mean dark in a thematic sense, but rather in a literal one. The trailers are just incredibly dark. The teaser trailer is especially keen on keeping things really dark, with the later release trailer finally brightening up the scenes just a bit more, to the point where we can actually see reimagined characters and computer-generated environments more clearly. But, then we also got these stills from the movie that were released on Twitter here recently that left much to be desired, to the point that other people tried to fix it for Disney, which in the end might reveal glaring issues with how Disney keeps envisioning these remakes. They lack good art direction. By choosing to go overly realistic with these movies, you run into a lot of issues, and when you try to make things realistic, we'll expect excellent levels of special effects and visual effects, when they really should have played into what worked for the animated version of this movie. Make it colorful, make it over the top, make it Fantasyland, because it's a fairy tale. There's a reason why people are really excited about a movie like Barbie, because it's okay with living in that fantasy world, and that results in something more interesting that actually has good art direction. But since Disney didn't decide to do that with this movie, we have to judge it on its attempt at realism and the issues that come with that. For works which depict a world photorealistically, certain times of day are rather challenging for CG artists to deal with. If a scene is taking place in broad daylight at midday when the sun shines strongest, your 3D models, PBR materials, textures, animations, particle systems, etc. should ideally look on point, as there are far fewer possibilities for the artist to strategically hide mistakes in plain sight. While many scenes in the trailer look good enough, some shots look a bit off, especially when it relates to animation work on the character and how the watery depths have been portrayed. One particular scene, which is both shown in the teaser and the trailer, show Ariel swimming out of a tunnel with Flounder following her lead. The movements look artificial, almost as if both Ariel and Flounder's animations are in a loop, with the characters being dragged across the screen linearly. This shot also showcases yet again how dark the trailers are, with characters only standing out from the background with the use of rim lighting. But once characters are put into the spotlight, we can observe something else that is interesting, which would be how in-camera recording recordings are combined with computer-generated imagery in order to make characters appear as if they actually exist underwater. At least that is the goal. The Little Mermaid trailers display one big problem. The ocean's submarine world often doesn't convey that feeling of actually existing underwater. There may be multiple factors at play here. For one, simulating water and making it look believable is a tough job, with various natural phenomena and physics having to be accounted for. Second, as we touched on in a previous video, making characters look like they are actually swimming through a scene without filling up a gigantic pool and conducting motion capture work underwater is incredibly tough and needs a good amount of trial and error and talented artists that can marry in-camera scenes together with motion captures and digitally created assets in a convincing manner. And since we mentioned underwater motion capture, the last big factor is that Avatar 2 just released, and no matter what you think about that movie, the water simulations in that production are incredible. Probably the best that's ever been done at this point. There was no chance that any other movie could even come close to competing with Avatar in that department. Looking at some scenes closer, both under and above the water, we may be able to find out what a big sticking point that may be.
Water was the biggest problem, and that's something we knew going in. That was going to be our challenge. But we hadn't really cracked the code on how to capture underwater. So they tried to talk me into hanging the actors on wires with like a little gimbal thing so they could swing around and do stuff.
We tried to pitch it to Jim and say, look, you can do dry for wet, and it's just as good as water. And we had to experiment with how we were going to do it. We had people on wires, and it just never worked.
It just doesn't work. It looks phony. And it also is distracting from performance and so on, and you're not getting the real water physics.
Generally speaking, simulating water is tough, and it requires both physics calculations and some smart fakery to achieve stunning results. One effect that can be observed both times in the trailers would be caustics, light ripples that you can typically see dancing on the bottom of the seafloor or at the bottom of a pool. Calculating physically accurate caustics is often too resource intensive and time consuming, which is why the phenomena is often faked. For instance, by using animated textures that scroll over a surface, or by making use of an algorithmic approach like the one used in this fun web demonstration. One can achieve convincing enough looking caustics with a far lower computational cost when compared to simulating light traveling through the water realistically. But there isn't just this software-based solution for the simulation of caustics. You could also do it for real, which might be what happened for the filming of the singing scene, which we are shown in the teaser. If under a spotlight a transparent container filled with water is attached, the light would refract through and cast ripples of light across the entire scene. A smart practical effect. But these caustics aren't enough. We also have to consider the behavior of the hair if submerged underwater. An effect which is often seen in Marvel films and in The Little Mermaid is a character's hair floating in the water, for which an actor's head is tracked during a shoot with the real hair getting digitally replaced. And while the motions do look convincing for the most part, from what we have seen in these trailers so far, it does look a little bit odd taking other effects or the lack of them into account. Maybe one of the biggest gripes with the way underwater scenes are portrayed in the trailers so far is that the light does not get tinted very much due to traveling through masses of water and distant objects, and characters do not get as blurry as one would expect. In Avatar 2, once the virtual cameras move underwater, one could see a significant change between how a character looks above and under the water surface. The scenery is tinted in a bluish hue, and objects and characters appear blurrier, not that far away from the camera thanks to how light is scattered in water. In scenes in which characters converse or otherwise interact with each other underwater, they rather look like they've been filmed in a conventional room that is filled with oxygen, not water. The actor's skin appears oilier and generally doesn't look the same way it would underwater either, where the skin would mostly appear considerably more matte, blurring some of the smaller creases and details of the skin away with lights and shadows generally appearing softer. Additionally, the ocean floor could reflect some sunlight, lighting a character a little bit from below if the water isn't too deep. But maybe comparing this film too much to Avatar might be a bit unfair, considering that Avatar 2 is filled with full CG characters while The Little Mermaid relies on mostly filmed performances. It is difficult to make one's skin look like one is submerged in water when the performer isn't, and the clarity in the water could also be explained to be a stylistic decision. The Little Mermaid is a Disney fairy tale at the end of the day, and capturing reality, I'm sure, isn't on the top of the list of priorities, which brings us to the diverse character redesigns of Disney. In a story which a majority of characters are talking animals, wouldn't it be a problem if those characters didn't emote, essentially? The remake of The Lion King has this exact problem, in which for the sake of realism, the characters have been limited to only being capable of gestures and facial movements, which the real-life counterpart is realistically capable of reproducing, which makes lip syncing a hassle, restricts characters in terms of locomotion and gesticulation, and most damaging for an emotional musical experience, the characters' faces become harder to read, crippling their ability to deliver emotional weight through animation.
To me as an animator, I really feel like an actor, even though we work with a pencil, we don't put ourselves in front of this screen. And for a character like Scar, it is an animal, so you have to bring animal qualities, a real lion walk and how a lion moves and their mannerisms, plus you have to humanize that and have real facial expressions that a human has. So it's a funny combination of things. It's different than animating a human.
Coming back to The Little Mermaid, if you think of Ariel's friends, you might immediately think of the expressive and charismatic faces of Sebastian, Flounder, and Scuttle. None of these characters look exactly like the animals they are supposed to portray, but enough of their features are reminiscent enough that the viewer accepts these anthropomorphized characters as being the animals they portray, and that even though a fish and a crab have relatively human-looking faces and have an expanded range of motions the real animal counterparts are not capable of. In the original movie, the colorful world under the sea, together with the expressive characters and memorable musical performances, made Disney's version of the fairy tale a perfect example for the benefits of stylized animation. But now compare the iconic animal characters from the original to the reimagined CG counterparts. Sebastian is a crab, Scuttle is a seagull, and Flounder is such an unremarkable looking fish, you may have completely missed his appearance in the trailers. A lot of people did. Because Ariel is a character that is acted out by a human, she remains expressive in a non-verbal sense. Yet some of the supporting cast might face the same issues that characters in The Lion King suffered from. While it is difficult enough already to understand an animal's emotions we are somewhat familiar with, reading a crustacean's emotional state from a gesticulation or facial movements alone is almost impossible. Flounder having it especially rough, as a fish's anatomy is not very expressive at all. These problems, however, do not mean that photorealistic portrayals of animals cannot be expressive. If a team is willing to do so, human facial movements could be translated to an animal's face, enabling animators to convey emotion through movements of eyebrows, smiles, and frowns. Disney, for crying out loud, you make movies about singing animals, they do not need to be realistic. I mean, I don't think anyone's gonna criticize you for not doing that. It really makes one wonder what Disney's goals with the remakes are beyond banking on feelings of nostalgia. And looking into some of the methods behind the VFX of the trailers, it does show that some scenes may look a bit rough around the edges. Too dark, many shots look too artificial, and the characters' redesigns of Ariel's animal friends are just as emotionless as Disney's other photoreal reimaginings. Really, the trailers left us a bit cold. However, trailer footage from another film, namely Oppenheimer, could be considered warming in a ridiculous sense. It doesn't get any more photoreal than actual in-camera recordings, and since Oppenheimer is a Christopher Nolan flick, it naturally was shot on film. If you want to know more about the movie's odd black and white film stock, check that out right here.